In this video, we are going to learn about the methodology of scoring respiratory events in two cases, in obstructive sleep apnea syndrome patient and in chain stroke breathing patient, in accordance with the updated ASM guidelines version 2.5. First, it's important to be familiar with the normal breathing pattern in polysomnography. This is a 2 minutes window. We have SpO2 on the top, we have snore, we have nasal pressure, we have thermistor, and we have the respiratory effort. This is a sinusoidal breathing pattern, no distortions, no flattenings of the inspiratory portions that are located upward. Furthermore, if you look at the thoracoabdominal effort, you can see the synchronicity of the pattern. These findings support normal breathing pattern. This is the recommended workflow for analyzing respiratory events. First, we look for apneas on thermal signal. If there is an apnea, then we score the event. If there is no apnea, then we look for hypopneas on hypopnea sensors. Then we look for associations and we score the event. It is also important to be familiar with the event duration rules. For scoring either an apnea or hypopnea, the event duration is measured from the first breath that is clearly reduced to the beginning of the first breath that approximates the baseline amplitude. In this example, and based on the recommended workflow for analyzing respiratory events, if you look at the thermal sensor, there is a significant drop. So this is the beginning of the first breath that is clearly reduced, and this is the beginning of the first breath that approximates the pre-event baseline amplitude. So how can we define a baseline? We look at the 2 minutes preceding the onset of the event, and if the breathing pattern is stable, then we take the average amplitude and we consider our baseline. In this example, if you look at the thermal sensor, there is no significant drop in the signal amplitude. So we go to the nasal pressure, and here it's obvious that we have a significant drop. This is the beginning or the onset of the event, and here is the offset of the event. Baseline, if you look at the 2 minutes preceding the onset, then we take the average amplitude. This is a stable breathing pattern. What if we have repetitive episodes of respiratory events, like if we have unstable breathing pattern? So we look at the 2 minutes preceding the onset of one of the events, and we take the average amplitude of the 3 largest breaths. Apnea Rule. Score a respiratory event in adults as an apnea if both of the following criteria are met. There should be a drop in the peak signal by more than or equal to 90% using an oronasal thermal sensor if it's a diagnostic study, using the PAP device flow if it's a titration study, or using an alternative apnea sensor like the XSUM or the XFlow. The duration of the more than or equal to 90% drop should be at least 10 seconds. In this example, here is the oronasal thermal airflow, and here we have significant drop, which makes more than 90% compared to the pre-event baseline amplitude, makes more than 10 seconds. So the entire duration should be scored as an apnea, since the event duration is defined as the first breath that is clearly reduced. So we score the event from this point till this point, which is the beginning of the first breath that approximates the pre-event baseline amplitude. It is recommended to subclassify the apneas, as there are 3 different types of apneas. Obstructive apnea is defined and scored when the effort is continued throughout the apnea period. Central apnea is scored when the inspiratory effort is absent throughout the entire apnea period. And this is another example from the real life showing a central episode. This is 2 minutes window. This is SpO2. Here we have snore. This is nasal pressure. This is thermistor. And we have the thoracoabdominal effort. Here, it's obvious that the drop makes more than 90%. Duration is more than 10 seconds. And during the apnea period, it's evident that the effort is absent. So this is a central episode. Those small humps represent cardiac rhythm, and this is called cardioballistic oscillation that happens and appears when there is central episode. Mixed apnea is scored when there is an absent inspiratory effort in the initial portion of the event, followed by resumption of inspiratory effort in the second portion of the event. There are two definitions as per the ASM to score hypopneic events, the recommended 1A and the accepted 1B. So according to the recommended 1A, score respiratory event as a hypopnea if all of the following are met. The drop should be more than or equal to 30%, using nasal pressure if it's diagnostic study, using PAP device flow if it's titration study, or using an alternative hypopnea sensor like X-thumb and X-flow. The duration of the 30% drop should be at least 10 seconds, and that event should be associated with either more than or equal to 3% oxygen desaturation or an arousal event. There are two types of hypopneas: obstructive hypopneas and central hypopneas. Obstructive hypopnea results when there is an obstruction in the upper airways, and these can be scored if any of the following criteria are met. If there is increased inspiratory flattening of the nasal pressure or PAP device flow signal compared to baseline breathing, here there is a drop and there is flattening of the inspiratory portion, so this is a sign of obstruction. If there is snoring during, before, or after the events, and there should be an associated thoracoabdominal paradox occurs during the event but not during pre-event breathing, as a sign of obstruction. The upper window shows the neurological traces, and this is displayed over 30 seconds. The lower window shows the respiratory traces that are displayed over 2 minutes. The black bar is called the indication bar, and this is used to synchronize the two different worksheets displayed on two different time bases. Based on the recommended workflow, if you look at the thermistor, there is no evidence of an apnea. If you move to the nasal pressure signal, there is an evidence of a hypopnea in terms of the percentage of reduction that makes more than 30%, as well as the duration, which makes it more than 10 seconds. This is the onset of the event, which is the beginning of the first breath that is here reduced. And here is the beginning of the first breath that approximates the pre-event baseline amplitude. Now, in order to fulfill the criteria of a hypopnea, we need to look for associations. So we need to have either a desaturation that makes more than 3%, which is obvious here. Otherwise, we need to look for associated arousals, which is also obvious here. So the event is a hypopnea according to the recommended 1A definition because of the following. Signal excursion is more than 30%. Event duration is more than 10 seconds. There are desaturation and an arousal. Acceptable 1B, according to that definition, we score the event as a hypopnea if all of the following are met. There should be drop more than or equal to 30%. Duration of the 30% drop should be at least 10 seconds. And it should be only associated with 4% oxygen desaturation or more. This is the same example that we explained in the previous definition, recommended 1A. And here we ignored the arousals because the criteria doesn't rely on associated arousals. Here we have 2 minutes time-based window for respiratory events, and here is the reduction of more than 30%, duration is more than 10 seconds, and it is associated with only 3% desaturation, so this event should not be scored as a hypopnea in accordance with the second definition or the accepted 1B definition for scoring hypopneas. So, recommended 1A definition for scoring hypopnea can result in overestimation of the hypopnea index, while using the accepted 1B definition can result in underestimation of the severity of the hypopnea index. So, sleep labs should document and report which definition is being used. Case study number 1. We have a symptomatic patient for obstructive sleep apnea syndrome. Nocturnal polysomnography study was performed using S4500 amplifier and Neurology 3.4.1 software. So the upper window shows 30 seconds time base, while the lower window shows 2 minutes time base. The upper window shows the EEG trace, C4M1, just to associate arousals with the respiratory events. The lower window shows the respiratory traces. We have SpO2, we have snore, nasal pressure, thermistor, thoracoabdominal effort. And the black bar is used to synchronize the time when you display 2 different worksheet templates on 2 different time bases. Based on the recommended workflow for analyzing respiratory events, first we look at the thermal channel. Here it's obvious that we have significant reduction. So this is the beginning of the event. And here is the beginning of the first breath that approximates the previous baseline amplitude. So this event should be scored as an obstructive apnea because of the continued effort throughout the apnea period. Next event, again, this is the thermal channel, and there is no obvious and significant reduction that makes more than 90% drop, so there is no apnea. If you look at the nasal pressure signal, this is the first breath that is clearly used. However, as per the old recommendations, we might continue to highlight the event till we reach the beginning of the first breath that approximates the previous baseline amplitude. And this makes 83 seconds duration. That doesn't make sense for us. So in the new rule for the baseline, when baseline breathing amplitude cannot be easily determined, and when underlying breathing variability is large, events can also be terminated when either there is a clear and sustained increase in breathing amplitude that represents slight opening in the upper airway, or when there is a resaturation of at least 2%. So according to the new rule, we would start the event from here and end the event from here as a result of the sustained breathing that is obvious over here. And then we score another event. Another example, no apnea here based on the thermal channel. However, we have hypopnea. We begin the event from here, we end it here. And this event is associated with an arousal. Another event over here. And this event is also associated with desaturation and an arousal of sleep. Another hypopneic event, here we have sustained increase in the breathing pattern. We start another event from this point till we reach this previous baseline amplitude. These events are associated with significant desaturations. Another hypopnea associated with desaturation, and another hypopnea that is associated with desaturation. 60 years old male with congestive heart failure disease and excessive daytime sleepiness. Polygraphy recording was performed using Emlita X10 and Neurology 3.4.1 software. Before we go to that case, let's review the guidelines for scoring central hypopneas. So central hypopnea happens as a result of decreased ventilatory effort, while the upper airway is patent and open. So there will be no snoring episodes associated with the event. There will be no increased inspiratory flattening of the nasal pressure or PAP device flow signal compared to baseline breathing. And there will be no associated thoracoabdominal paradox throughout the hypopneic period. This is 2 minutes window and shows the respiratory traces because it's a polygraphy study. This is the SpO2. Here we have the snoring. This is the nasal pressure. This is the thorax and abdominal breathing. So no thermistor was recorded for this study, which is a limitation for polygraphy studies. This is the baseline breathing, and this is the first breath that is clearly reduced, and this is the first breath that approximates the previous baseline amplitude. Throughout the hypopneic period, there is no flattening, no distortion of the inspiratory portions. If you look at the thoracoabdominal effort, it is completely synchronized, which indicates that the upper airway is patent. So this event should be scored as a central hypopnea. Another event, we have significant drop, makes more than 90%. Effort is absent throughout the 90% drop period. So this is the central apnea. Another central apnea. Reduction in the amplitude, but it's still continued. No flattening, no distortion on the inspiratory portions. Effort is synchronized, so this is central hypopnea. Another central hypopnea. Another central hypopnea because the effort is continued throughout the hypopneic period. So there are more than 3 consecutive central episodes. So can this be scored as a chain stroke breathing pattern? Let's go back to the slides and review the rules. Chain stroke breathing event is scored when there is a minimum of 3 consecutive central hypopneas or central apneas, separated by crescendo-decrescendo pattern of breathing, and a cycle length of 45 to 90 seconds. Then we score the event. This is 10 minutes window, and we have more than 3 consecutive events. This is a crescendo-decrescendo pattern of breathing, and the cycle length is more than 45 to 90 seconds. How can we measure the cycle length? Cycle length is measured from the zenith of the inspiratory portion that precedes a central apnea or central hypopnea to the zenith that follows a central apnea or central hypopnea. Or it can be measured from the onset of the first central episode to the onset of the next central episode. So to measure the cycle length, this is the zenith of the inspiratory portion preceding this central apnea, and this is the zenith of the inspiratory portion following that central apnea. And the duration is more than 45 seconds and less than 90 seconds. For this event, to measure the cycle length, this is around 50 seconds. So measuring cycle lengths can be really time consuming to score CSB events. In Neurology software, there is a CSB module that can detect the typical crescendo and decrescendo patterns, and that can also measure cycle lengths, apneic and hyperapneic phases. So in order to get the CSB module analysis, you need to use one of the following signals: thoracic effort, abdominal effort, X-sum, or X-flow. So CSB analyzer scores the following events on a specified trace: apneic phase, hyperapneic phase, cycle length, and CSB sequences. These are the apneic and hyperapneic phases, automatically detected. Crescendo and decrescendo patterns of breathing. Sequence of a CSB. And the cycle length. So it's time-saving approach that can really help you identifying those pathological forms. In Neurologic reports, it's also possible to activate the embedded CSB section that shows percentage of CSB compared to analyzed time, minutes of CSB during analyzed time, number of CSB sequences, number of change stock cycles, longest duration of CSB, shortest CSB sequence, average length. This is the end of the video.